I'm not going to go into as much detail, but these signs are left over from that. Just to give you a little background, I started at the field station 2 years after the eucalyptus were originally planted, and it's important to note that they've been harvested twice since '84. So
yeah, that's true. These are the coppice sprouts.
These are coppice sprouts, and there was damage from freezing one year, and there was harvesting one year. But so they grow really quite fast. In '87, I came in '86. I did the first planting of oaks, which is up here. I guess it actually starts kind of right here. All these blue oaks were planted in '87. And a little background about why we did that. Both Bill Tichy, the next speaker, and myself were hired in '86 as part of a new UC program that was focused on oaks and oak woodland conservation. This program started because at that time there were a lot of people that were concerned that though we had a lot of oak woodlands in the state, they weren't being managed, they were being lost at an alarming rate. There was some increased firewood harvesting after the first petrochemical kind of shortage in the early 70s, I guess. There were a lot of agricultural conversions where they took wooded hillsides and removed the trees. Like that. We did it here. Ours was for research, but operationally they cleared about 2 million acres in California of oak woodlands and of chaparral to improve the productive capacity for livestock. If you remove all the trees, you do get a flush of new growth, but as we were talking right before lunch, this does not last forever, and there certainly are some benefit of trees in terms of being nutrient sinks, being places where livestock can get shade in the hot summer months, and as Bill's going to talk about from a wildlife habitat standpoint and from aesthetics too. So there was concern that oak woodlands were being not only not managed but really mismanaged, and that there was the state needed to do something. So there was a lot of discussion about whether they should regulate, whether the State Board of Forestry should step in and say, we're not only going to regulate harvesting on higher elevation commercial timberlands, we're going to regulate harvesting on oak woodlands too. It was not uniformly, not everybody agreed that this was a good idea. About 80% of the oak woodlands in California are in private ownership, mainly livestock producers, ranchers, and they weren't terribly eager to have another level of regulation over their lands. And that may be a little oversimplified, but basically the California Cattleman, the wool growers, and the Farm Bureau all were, took policy positions against statewide regulation. There was a lot of debate. In the end, they started a research and education program called the Integrated Hardwood Range Management Program. That's when Bill and I were hired. One of the concerns, in addition to a lot of harvesting, was that certain species of oaks weren't naturally regenerating very well. So if you look on that far hillside, that's a blue oak woodland up there. It was thinned out to kind of help with, to kind of examine what landscapes would look like if they had fewer trees, but also to improve forage production. And you'd be probably hard-pressed to go up there and find, a sapling oak up there. It's a harsh environment. There's a lot of this range vegetation is a very heavy competitor. There are animals that eat acorns and eat oak seedlings. And so you're not going to find a lot of oak regeneration. This is true in stands of blue oak and valley oak and Engelmann oak. These are three oak species. Blue oak and valley oak grow here. Engelmann oak is in Southern California. So there was a need to try to understand why the oaks weren't regenerating. And from my standpoint, when I was first hired, due to my training in forestry, to figure out ways to successfully grow them. So it's kind of complicated why they're not regenerating, but one of it is that the range vegetation is different than it was 300 years ago. It's most of it is exotic annuals that were brought in from the Mediterranean region, the bromes, the ryes, you have different thistles, You have oats. None of those plants, or very few of them, are native to California. They were originally brought in grain sacks when the Spanish missionaries moved to California, and they're really adapted to this kind of environment. They came from the Mediterranean region, and in terms of star thistle, I guess Turkey. But it's a fairly similar environment here. They really spread widely. Unlike star thistle that only spreads 5 feet, if a cow eats some bromus and then it is shipped 200 miles and then it defecates, that seed can stay alive in its gut and it germinates and grows. And basically in 100 years or so, the range vegetation of the state changed. It's really quite remarkable. There are efforts to go back and to reintroduce perennial bunch grasses, but it's not going to happen on a huge, large scale. You know, we seem to be here, though, with climate change, you know, anything's possible. Who knows? So, Bill and I were hired to address oak woodland conservation, and I was started figuring out ways to successfully plant oaks. This was the first planting of blue oak. They're now 21, 22 years old. There's some fairly substantial plants in there. They're originally planted on a 5-foot spacing, but we've thinned them down. We've taken 3/4 of them out, and we probably should do some more. This dense little area we planted on a 1-foot spacing. It was part of a trial to look at germination and when we sowed acorns, and it's been abandoned for about 20 years, but that's too dense. 300 seedlings on 300 square feet, basically. These are valley oaks. They were also planted on a 5-foot spacing. Again, 3/4 of them have been removed. But the interesting thing is, even though it's difficult to regenerate oaks, it's even more difficult to get rid of them, it seems like. I mean, we've gone in here and harvested and took out 90 of 120 trees, and dang, they're hard to kill. I mean, you cut them, they sprout back. You spray them with herbicide, they sprout back. We even took one of those propane torches, you know, that any pyromaniac could fall in love with, because it blows this flame out and you can kind of burn the tops of the stumps. They grow back. They have dormant buds under the soil that, you know, avoids all these nasty things we are doing to them, and they keep sprouting. This has sort of been abandoned, so we're not that worried about it. But this is our first planting. If you look over here, those are all oaks, and that was a bare hillside. There probably are 4,000 oaks over there, and the crew's anxious to get in there and whack them down. And certainly we do need to thin them because they're way too dense. But I think that there is some opportunities for research on sapling size oaks, so we don't want to abandon everything completely. Though we'll do something like Janine and thin out part of these. We've done research on acorns and acorn kind of physiology. I'll just give you a very brief summary of what we've found. Acorns have a lot of stored food in carbohydrates, and this gives the oaks a real advantage in a Mediterranean climate. Because if you sow an acorn in November, it'll start growing a new root right away, even in those cold temperatures. It doesn't slow down. Even in the refrigerator, they start germinating and growing. They will send down, given, unless the soil's so compacted that it's hard, but let's say you auger a hole, they'll send down about a 3-foot root before the top even comes up. So they really have that advantage to them, and it's necessary in this, you know, pretty harsh environment, because as you know, from today on, I wouldn't be surprised if we get no more measurable precipitation. Well, I guess there's rain scheduled for next week. Well, not much. What do we get? A 20th of an inch out of this one? Probably not. We didn't get hardly anything. But anyway, it gets very dry here, and so if a plant is going to survive, it's going to have to deal with those dry conditions. The native oak strategy is to send down a deep root deeper in the soil, as we saw in the soil pits and heard this morning. You have more soil moisture, so they're able to do that. Because of all this, the fact that a lot of these rangelands have been grazed continuously for the last 150 years, they're very hard and compacted. So we have found that if you auger a hole down through that compacted layer, the oaks get a better start. It's also important to sow the acorns early. Another thing with acorns, you can't store them. So you're sort of if you want to do a large-scale planting, you're dependent on the current year's acorn crops. And as any of you live near oak trees, you know that the number of acorns produced varies tremendously from year to year. There's, bumper years when they're all over the place and can even, be sort of annoying if you're walking and, you're afraid you're going to fall because they kind of roll when you step on them or they fall on your roof. There are other years when you can hardly find a single acorn. And we had a fellow here on Wednesday talk about the reasons, and it seems to have to do with the conditions right about now. If you have really warm conditions, especially early in the spring, in dry conditions, oaks are wind pollinated. It helps pollen distribution. But something I learned, if you have real warm conditions, it brings the trees more in synchrony so they leaf out over a shorter period of time. Often you'll see one oak that'll be fully leafed out, another one fully bare. Well, if you have really warm springs, it condenses that, so most of them leaf out at the same time. When they're leafing out, they're also producing male and female flowers, and so you get pollen being distributed over a larger area to receptive female flowers. So it just seems to help the acorn crop. Some other things we've learned, we've done some work with producing oaks in containers, growing them in pots or in bare root nurseries, and it seems like because of this tendency to produce a massive root, you can't grow them in a container for too long. They can become pot-bound fairly quick. Deeper, taller containers are better than, short, fat containers. That just accommodates the root. And again, you want to be planting those seedlings fairly early in the season, probably by the end of January, to really have them well adapted. Probably the area that we've done the most research, at least in the last 10 years, is once you collect the acorns, you grow the seedlings, or you're directly sowing the seedlings, how do you get them to survive and grow out in the field? Now, in a natural situation, there are things that limit them. They can be browsed by deer, they can be browsed by livestock, both cattle and sheep, as well as goats and horses will chew on oaks, though maybe it's not their favorite thing. You also have lots of rodents. Microtus californicus, which is a California vole, or meadow mice is another common name. Very damaging. They strip the bark. You have gophers that'll eat the roots. You have grasshoppers. You've got oak worms. You've got a range of animals that you got to deal with if you're going to be successful in getting oaks to grow. And probably our biggest success has been with something called tree shelters, which are individual shelters that go over seedlings. If you walk back around here, you can see some small ones over here, but they're basically tubes, and Caltrans uses them all over the place. They've started to be being used by the vineyard industry because they not only protect from a wide range of animals, but they act like little mini greenhouses and really stimulate rapid growth. It is not unusual for us to plant an acorn, put a tree shelter over it, keep the weeds away, and in 2 years it'll be up to the top of a 4-foot tree shelter, sometimes in 1 year. So the oaks, though they have a reputation for growing very slowly, they really can grow fast if you protect them from animals, and second, if you protect them from the competition that these introduced plants. Here we have rye, it looks like we have foxtail barley, we've got ripgut, brome, soft chest. All those things are exotic, introduced, that compete greatly with the oaks. We have found that if you keep the weeds away in about a 4-foot circle for 2 years, that helps tremendously. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can do it with herbicides. We've generally used Roundup. The problem with Roundup is not everything germinates at the same time. A lot of things germinate in early February, and so usually mid-February is the time we want to start spraying. Otherwise, those plants will use up the soil moisture. But you come back in May, and where you've sprayed, you'll find turkey mullein, you'll find mustard, you'll find star thistle. Those are a lot of late germinating plants. So often with contact herbicide like Roundup, you need to do 2 sprays. But if you do control the vegetation, keep it bare, you you greatly increase the soil moisture content and you allow these things to grow. We don't think you have to do that forever, but certainly for 2 or 3 years. I had another point, it was right there, but it's, you know, kind of went on. Happening more
What
often.
about Roundup
these
with a
days.
pre-emergent?
No. Roundup is a contact herbicide that anything green, leaf tissue it touches, it kills. It's very non-discriminating, so it kills everything. So if you're trying to treat an area around where existing oaks are, you've got to be careful not to put it on the soil surface. But as Art said, it really binds very quickly to the soil and it doesn't have any soil activity. Though I do see that they're advertising on the radio a new product that has soil activity. So I don't know if they put some Goal or Post or some other soil active herbicide in with it or not. But it's not a it's a pre-emergent in that if you could plant acorns and you could spray right over the top, and it would be fine.
There's a product that combines Roundup and a pre-emergent.
That's right, there is. Now that's brand new though, because I've never heard of it until the radio this year. Now maybe it's been out there.
Yeah, I've been using
But,
it for about 5 years.
oh, you have? Okay. Okay, that may be good. You know, if I went back in my career, there are a lot of things I'd have done different, but I've looked at looked at more studies with sort of
I'm lazy, so I don't have
active
to spray
herbicides.
once.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tree shelters work good, weed control, but with those two things, we do feel that we can establish oaks. The problem is it's fairly expensive. I know I was talking to this gentleman over here who had wanted to buy tree shelters to help establish some oaks, but they're not only expensive to start with, but if you just order a few, you know, they're real expensive. They're not often distributors. So we're hoping that, you know,
sell them by semi-truck.
yeah, you don't want a semi-truckload full.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
How
That,
about white plastic pipe? 4-inch pipe.
I think that it doesn't allow enough light to go through. So, yeah. Even the tree shelters really greatly reduce, you know, at least like 50-75%. So we found that if you put the tree shelters around a seedling, that's the last thing I was going to talk about. Dustin and I are cooperating, and Bill also, on a project. Since it is so expensive to artificially regenerate oaks, we thought, well, after a really good acorn year, a lot of times you can find little seedlings. The problem is these things never grow up into saplings. That seems to be the bottleneck, from the seedling to the sapling stage. It's expensive to collect acorns, to grow seedlings, to plant, to maintain, to do everything. So we thought, well, maybe we could work with the existing seedlings that are out there after a good acorn year and kind of do some things, and the same things we do with planted seedlings, to help get them along. So this is a study where we have 6 sites throughout the state, from Tehama County down to Monterey or down to Santa Barbara County, and we're at each site we found 144 naturally growing oaks. Some of them we put tree shelters around, some of them we've done weed control, some of them are in the shade, some are in the open, and we're going to follow these for several years. And you know, even after 1 year, we found that the tree shelter significantly improved height growth and the weed control significantly improved survival. So we're optimistic that with these, that we can develop some techniques which aren't so dang expensive. Yeah.
I notice you don't seem to have a problem here, but a little further up,
Yeah.
mistletoe seems to be predatory relationship with these oaks. And
Yeah.
do you have any comments on that?
You know, I'm not an expert on that, but I do get that question a lot. Mistletoe is a parasite. It does have photosynthetic tissue, green leaves. It manufactures its own food, but by and large, it really sucks moisture from the tree. And that normally in the winter it's not a problem, but in the summer, when trees, actually these native oaks have something called drought deciduousness, and when it gets really dry, they'll just drop their leaves. The first year I was here, in mid-August, at least half of the oaks here lost all their leaves. And usually they don't, I think they usually don't lose them till Thanksgiving. This year they held on to their leaves till after Christmas. I mean, these trees were only bare for about a month this year for some reason. And I think it may have had to do with that freeze that we had on April 22nd last year. It screwed something up physiologically, and it, you know, the leaf abscission didn't work properly. But getting back to mistletoe. So there was a point there, I do remember. But, okay, the point was that oaks have adapted ways to deal with moisture loss with dry soils, but mistletoe is not something they've adapted to, so they can damage trees by utilizing more moisture that dries the tree out. That being said, there's a tree I drive by up here in Penn Valley that I've been driving by for 23 years that has more mistletoe than foliage in the summer. I mean, you look at it, about 75% of the green is mistletoe. It hasn't killed that tree. It takes a long time, if ever, for mistletoe to kill trees, to kill oaks. I wouldn't say. There are two different kinds of mistletoe. There's a mistletoe in the pines, and that's a whole different subject. But the mistletoe, it's a parasite. It can damage trees, it can weaken them, but it's really not a threat to their survival in most cases, and it does provide some benefits in terms of it's excellent wildlife product because it has these berries which birds love. And that's why often you find a lot of mistletoe in one tree, because the birds will sit there and eat the berries and then defecate, and then the goop in the scat falls down into a little crevice. It germinates and grows. To get rid of mistletoe, you got to cut it out, but you got to get rid of the root too. So often you have to cut a big part of the branch, or you cut it off and wrap it in plastic. I think maybe there's some herbicides registered for it too that might be work for deciduous oaks when they're bare. Yes?
I wanted to ask about transplanting little guys.
Yeah.
I mean, we're down in District 10, and I have oak trees coming up in all the wrong places.
Right.
In the last 5 years, we've just got oak trees coming up like crazy. So
Yeah.
I've been transplanting them.
Yeah. How does it work?
Well,
Not so good.
well, no, it's working. I mean,
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of it, but I think it's possible to do. If you transplant them, you'd want to do it in the winter, especially if they're deciduous and they're bare. You want to make sure that first year they get plenty of moisture, because regardless of how you do it, you're going to not get about half of the root, because it has that very deep root. But I think, I mean, I've done it a little bit, and even larger trees, you know, pole-sized trees, you can transplant. When you start getting up into big trees, it's really hard. Yeah. It is. Yeah, you'll be discouraged if you try to follow the root down as far as it goes. You'll never get there. You know, it could be down 5 feet, or it could be in cracks in the soil. So it is hard. It may be easier just to start with acorns because they can grow pretty fast. But I know what you're saying, because a lot of people, you feel bad about mowing them or cutting them or killing them, because there is this problem with regeneration. You want to move them to places, but it can be a problem. But I know it can be successful sometimes.
I've found that if I mix a big old batch of oak leaves up with some acorns, that seems to be a good medium for. You can get them out of the acorn, or you can get them out of the oak leaves pretty easy.
Okay.
And then plant them, and you're still not going to have a great survival rate, but they've been better than any of the ones I've tried digging up.
You can pre-germinate them. I mean, that's another thing. You can collect the acorns and you can put them just in a little tray of soil for a week or 10 days. White oaks anyway, the blue oak and the valley oak, and they'll start germinating. Once they have that little radical, you can plant them. You want to bury them in the soil at least an inch and a half, about an inch, half an inch to an inch deep. There is a publication called Regenerating Rangeland Oaks in California, which our program produced, and it kind of gives all the information. Unfortunately, we had this workshop, and I wanted to hand one out to everybody, and I'm told they're out of print. So I feel good about that since I wrote it and they sold them all, but it may be harder to get them, so I don't know. We'll reprint it, but I ain't going to revise it. And that's the problem. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay.
Does the addition of Roundup have any impact on the chemical composition of the soil to which it's applied?
There certainly are concerns about any chemicals, and you worry because there have been in the past, like the atrazine and things like that, that were used widely, and then we found out they weren't so safe as what we originally thought. Roundup seems to be about the most benign or user-friendly chemical there is. It doesn't really, because it binds so rapidly in the soil, and it does break down fairly. I don't know, the half-life is less than a year, I think. He's the toxicologist.
It binds very tightly to the soil, and the tightness of the binding is what slows its decomposition. Roundup is the glyphosate itself is a very simple molecule. It's an amino acid, glycine, to which they've added a couple of little things. And so what it does, it targets a very specific enzyme in a photosynthetic plant. So all the other microorganisms and everything else, they just look at it as food if they can get to it. It doesn't affect them.
Okay, there was a question
I
here.
was going to ask
No.
about the sudden oak death virus stuff
Yep.
that's going on in the state.
Sudden oak death is a new disease. It was first observed in 1995. In 2000, they discovered what was causing it. It's caused by an organism called Phytophthora ramorum. You've probably heard of Phytophtheras. There are about 60 species worldwide. The most famous one is Phytophthora lateralis, which causes the Irish potato blight. That one is particularly nasty because it was airborne, so the spores could blow around and infect things. This is what's has killed, now they say hundreds of thousands of oaks. Really tough on tan oak. It also affects coast live oak and California black oak. But the conditions inland here seem to be such that we don't think it'll spread to the east side of the valley. It seems to be a coastal phenomenon. Probably 6-8 years ago, there were 14 counties that had it, from Monterey in the south to Humboldt in the north, and there's a little outbreak in Oregon. That range hasn't extended further, but there's been a lot of filling in. It seems to really spike after a very wet winter, and since we've had pretty dry winters, it hasn't really spread as bad. So it's a problem over there, and there's an organization called the California Oak Mortality Task Force, which has a very good website that talks about what the current management recommendations. There is one treatment that if you get in early, a high-value tree, you can make it somewhat resistant to the organism. So that's about what we know about it now.
I had a few acres I was subdividing, and the Yuba County wanted me to mark any oak that was 5 inches or bigger at breast height. They even wanted me to GPS the oaks. I just wondered if you had an opinion on that.
Seems like a heck of a lot of work.
Well, before it could be subdivided. That's the.
I mean, I think that the motive is good. They, all the counties in California are encouraged to have oak plans.
Because they say it's an endangered species.
Yeah. It's not, the valley oak is on the California Native Plant Society of a species of concern. No other oaks are called endangered. I mean, there are none that are federally or state listed. So it's really not an endangered species. But especially the valley oaks, we probably have less than 5% of what we had at pre-settlement time. So it's certainly been a severely impacted species. And people do want to make, the efforts are try to make sure that this, some people call it a keystone species of the woodlands, is not impacted more than it has to be. But I'm not sure GPSing and measuring them, it keeps some people employed, but I'm not sure, it's good we're trying to get good inventory data, what we have, where it's being lost, but that's mainly done from aerial, from remote sensing, and there are sophisticated ways to do that, but I don't know. If you had 1,000 trees, that's a lot of work. Yeah, right.
Yeah, when you develop land in California, there's a new law that you have to mitigate for the loss of oaks.
Yes.
And I've seen that some other places. Is that an opportunity for small landowners to get some income by being the place where they mitigate, by putting oaks in?
I think that's possible. I mean, this is a new law. It's SB 1334. It was passed about 4 years ago, I think. And basically it says if there's a significant effect of a development on oak woodlands, then you have to mitigate that effect. And half of it can be by planting, but half of it has to be by some other method, generally putting land in a conservation easement or buying up some land so that it's protected. And so I think there are opportunities where, mitigation banking and things like that are ideas that are being developed in oak woodlands. And I know somebody mentioned the Bickford Ranch down in Placer County, and I think that they kind of screwed up and cut a bunch of trees when they weren't supposed to, and I believe they had to pay $4 million to Placer County to buy up other good oak woodland habitat. So it may turn out that that'll, there is a net loss, but at the same time, a lot more land, conservation easements are becoming much more popular and a lot more land's going into them. So I think we are locking up a lot of good critical habitat. It is important to set aside money to manage these places too, and Fish and Game has been criticized sometimes because if you just lock it up and don't do anything, you can have bad things happen. But if you can manage it, you know, not have the fire danger and you know, not have some of these other things, invasion of weeds and things like that that can happen if you don't do anything, then I think it's a really good thing.
But it's so complicated, most small people aren't really getting income from it.
That's I would say now, probably very not. And the planners are trying to figure out how to implement that law. You know, it was very vague in the language, and it's, you know, they said if it's a significant impact, but they didn't really spell out what a significant impact was.
Because it was supposed to produce income for the small landowners who planted oaks.
Yeah.